talk about teaching dressing skills. Some tips for doing this is you want to teach the skills from behind the student whenever possible. This helps with directionality and orientation to the clothing. Use hand over hand or hand under hand to teach the techniques to the student. You want to also verbally pair the body awareness concept with the action that you're doing, such as locate the button with your left hand, locate the button hole with your right hand. So as they're doing each step, they start to get awareness of their left and right. Even if they don't understand left and right, it's a good teaching time to teach those things. Also, you want to pair words with actions such as button up, zip up. You can, encourage parents to do this even if the student isn't actually doing these techniques themselves and they're still at the young age where the parents are dressing them, that as they pull their pants up, they want to say, pull your pants up, zip your pants up, button your pants up, so that the student starts to get used to even what that means. When teaching the skills, you want to encourage consistent language in the beginning, especially if there's multiple people teaching the skills, such as the parents. It's being worked on at home, it's being worked on at school. You want to stick with like pants. Always call them pants, not trousers and breeches and things like that, until the student really learns what those words mean. Eventually, they definitely want to learn a variety of words, but in the beginning, start with consistent language. Backward chaining is very helpful, which means actually in a whole series or a task, steps in a task that you may want the student just to complete the last step, such as when you put on your pants. You help the student put the pants on, you pull them up, and just have them zip up at the end. That's rewarding for the student because they feel like, ooh, I've got to complete this, and I've done it, as well as it just teaches step by step how to do the technique. So maybe at the end they're just zipping it up, and then the next time they've learned to pull the pants up and zip them up, and then slowly you add more and more steps from backwards. You want to use a systematic approach, teach the student to locate their clothing items systematically, as far as maybe they locate the collar, find the tag, find the sleeves, so that they have orientation to the clothing before they start to get dressed. Often students will just pick up a shirt and start to put it on and really don't know where's the top, where's the bottom. So teach them a systematic way to identify the parts of the clothing. You want to make dressing fun. You can do this by games, even maybe you can play games such as who can find the tag first, who can find the sleeve, or the parents encourage them when they're getting their children dressed, that they even hand the student the shirt and hand the sleeve and say, is that the collar? And make it back and forth and say, no, silly mommy, she knows that that's not the collar. So make it fun. Also, to have parents encourage them to have the students help them with folding the laundry. That's a good way to learn clothing orientation, and they can make that a game as well. Everything that they can make it fun will make learning to get dressed much easier. As far as zippers can be difficult for some students. Unzipping something is much easier than zipping it up. Again, work with backwards chaining with this. There's also things such as zipper pulls. I have one here. You can buy these in some of the specialty catalogs. I also know some camping catalogs sell them to put on tents and things to zip up, zippers on tents, but they also work great for clothing. All it is an addition that's added to the end of the zipper to make it bigger and easier to grasp, so that if the student has to zip it up, they can find the end of it much easier. I also have used rings. This is just a ring you can buy in like Office Depot. It's used to hold pieces of paper together, such as like index cards. Those work great to add to the end of zippers. Any kind of metal ring. They even sell special ones for little kids sometimes that have little animals and things on them that you can add to a zipper to make it easier to grasp. I already said about backwards chaining with zippers, but really that's a good thing to use and helpful with teaching zippers. With buttons, try to teach those on the actual clothing if you can. again, that's a directionality thing. If you're doing it on a doll, sometimes the student can learn to dress the doll but not learn to do their own buttons. So whenever possible, try to teach on the actual clothes. If you can use clothes with bigger buttons, those are easier to button. Sometimes if you take the buttons off and sew them back on so that they're loose, they're not so tight, they're easier to get on. Those are good things. You may just even want to do that with a few shirts and have those the shirts that the student really practices with. And even tell parents the student doesn't have to button every button from the beginning. And they may button them all but the last button. So that the student is still getting that practice. And all these skills, they want to start them as early as possible so the student can learn it while they're young. And also, when teaching buttons, encourage the student to either start at the top button or the bottom button, not in the middle. Tying shoes. It's definitely, again, easier to learn to untie a shoe than to tie it. Some tips for tying shoes. One, do the backwards chaining again, or maybe you tie the whole shoe for them, and the only thing they have to do at the end is pull it tight. Before I go on, actually, I want to stress, though, that if a student, their only disability is vision loss, they should be able to learn to tie a shoe. And it's something that you really want to encourage parents to work with on the student, and you want to work with it while the student's young. If their only difficulty is loss of vision, there's no reason that, when they're in 6th grade, they shouldn't still not be able to tie their shoe. What often happens is because it's a difficult task, parents always just buy Velcro shoes, always buy button shoes, or shoes that button, or slip-on shoes, and they never get that experience. So you really want to encourage that this technique be worked on while the child's young. If the student has multiple other disabilities, it may be something that they realistically can't learn. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be introduced. What you want to watch, though, is you don't want the student to be 18 years old and still be stuck on working on that technique day after day and never progressing on to other things that the student could do. But again, if they just lost the vision, they should be able to learn to do this. I mentioned backwards chaining. That's something that can be used for tying shoes. Sturdy laces are easier to tie than flimsy laces. You might want to pick shoelaces that are sturdy. Bright colored shoelaces can be helpful for a student with low vision. Or even if they're not bright colored, you can use shoe polish to apply to the ends of the shoes, laces, so that they can find the ends of them. They can put knots at the end of the laces so that they're easier to find the ends. I've even had students where you take 2 knots on one end and 1 knot on the other end so that they can identify the left side of the lace from the right side. You can also even actually take 2 shoelaces and tie them together and then thread them through the shoe. If you tie them together and you start at the bottom where they're tied together towards the toes, and have it even on each side, so one side's one type of lace, the other side's another type of lace, and then thread it through. So when they're done, they're 2 separate laces that feel very different. That's often very helpful so that when they make their loops, they can feel which one's which. Have a student, if they're having trouble, practice by putting their shoe inside of a bigger shoe. Sometimes for a small child working with the little shoelaces, there's not a lot of extra lace there for them to make their loops and everything. So if they use a bigger shoe, it's helpful. But you don't want to give them a shoe and have them just trying to tie it. They actually need to put their foot inside that big shoe so that they still are working from the same direction. It also can be helpful to just have them tie a shoelace that's very big, a large one, around their thigh and tie a bow on their thigh. So then they're not bending over so far when they're doing it. That can be helpful with learning it. Use hand over hand and hand under hand, verbal instructions, the whole combination of things when you're doing this. In the Foundation of Education, Chapter 16, there's actually step-by-step task analysis direction on how to actually make the loops and the order to do those things. And before you start with the student, though, actually practice it yourself and practice describing what to do, because you'll find it's a lot harder when you're actually teaching someone to do it, to tell them what's what. So you want to kind of think those steps through or make a task analysis for yourself first. Now let's talk about coordinating clothing. When coordinating clothing, the key here is organization. I can't emphasize that enough. The student has to be organized. You want to encourage them to use a labeling system. We talked a lot about that at the beginning as far as they could use safety pins in the tags, they can use buttons in the tags, they can use iron-on labels. It really doesn't matter what system they use, but they really need to develop a system, and they need to be involved in developing that system. Also, as far as the labeling, they need to have an organization system, where maybe it's when they put their clothes away in the drawer, they put the blue socks towards the left, and the white socks in the middle, and the black socks to the right. And again, all this takes, they have to think these three things out ahead of time. Even in the closet, maybe they kind of put their red shirts together and the blue shirts. This makes it so that they don't have to pull out as many items of clothing and check as many labels. They kind of know, that, well, the red shirts are over here, so I'll pull one out now and I'll check the label, rather than feeling 20 labels till they find the one they want. Also, with the organization, many people with low vision can identify the shirt or the clothing when it's out of the closet, and they can look at the color and the light. It gets lost in the closet because it's darker in there or whatever reason. That's why the organization system is also helpful. Many people can identify clothing by just the texture or memory or the certain identifying marks, and they don't necessarily have to label everything. In fact, the fewer things they label, the better, because the less they have to keep track of. So maybe they definitely can tell what's white, and they can definitely tell what's red, but it's the blues and blacks. So maybe they only label those ones. But they really want to label anything that they have to guess at. Socks can be a tricky thing for some people. I've had students that kind of just stick to basic white, black socks, and that's all they wear. And that's okay, but they may have that suit that requires the brown socks, or a suit that requires the green socks. So maybe they have mostly black and white socks, but they still have to have a way to identify those special ones that they need occasionally. You want to teach them that they don't have to wear the black socks with the green suit. Some things you can do with that, again, is may just be organization, that they put them in a separate spot. There are things called sock locks, which you can buy from different catalogs. This is one sock lock here. It's a square that has a hole in the middle with some teeth in that hole that enables, if you push the socks together, both pairs, or both socks to make a pair through the hole, the teeth kind of hold them tight together. These are great because you can match up all your socks in them. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. I have ones that are round that have a hole for each sock, but they're still connected together. I have another round one that's very similar to that square one that I talked about. It's round with a hole and teeth to grab the socks. It's just a different shape. Sometimes students will put maybe all their white socks paired together in the round one, and you can't see that, and all the, I don't know, I think I said white socks in the round one and black socks in the square one. Now this takes, again, organization. The great thing about these socks locks is they can go into the washer and into the drawer and always stay paired together. So what a student would do is maybe, if they don't have any vision, have somebody pair their socks up for them in the beginning, and then from there they always keep them paired. So they put on the black socks that morning, they take the square sock lock or whatever kind they use, stick it on their dresser in a special spot, wear the socks that day. When they take them off that night, they put them back through the sock lock, throw them in the dirty clothes, and go on about their day. So then when they do their laundry and putting things away, they're already paired up and identified as what color. So you can use multiple shapes and sizes, as well as safety pins work real well. If you use a big safety pin, you can use that to pair socks together. You want to make sure, though, that they put the pin in the middle of the socks, not on the ends. Because if you put it on the ends, the socks get very long and can get tangled up in the washer. Shoes. again, it's all organization, and it is cumbersome, and you have to be honest with the student that doing this does take more work and more time, but it enables them to be able to do this independently. And once they get good at their system, it should go much more quickly for them, and they shouldn't have to use as much time as they'll need in the beginning. Shoes, things that students can do is some people put a tack in the bottom of the heel, like a thumbtack, a flat one. Now again, it has to be a heel that's thick, so that obviously it's not going to poke them in the foot. Also, it works better on like a rubber-soled shoe. If you use it on a hard-soled shoe, sometimes it'll be slippery. But maybe they have 2 pair of sneakers, and the sneakers look similar and feel similar. Well, on the 2 that match, they could put the tacks on the bottom, so they can identify it that way. Some people will just keep shoe boxes, and when they take them off, put them in the shoe boxes, and even in large print label the shoe box, or hook them together with clothespins. Any type of system is fine, but again, they have to use it consistently, or once they get separated, it doesn't work. I've had students use colored tape. If they can see the colors of tape that inside the shoe, they'll put 2 pieces of blue piece of tape in one shoe and a blue piece of tape in the other shoe that matches. And then the second pair of sneakers, they put red tape, so that they can use that to help identify the differences. With dressing, you really want to teach the student about privacy and what they need to do to ensure that when they're getting dressed, that they're alone and dressing in an appropriate manner, an appropriate place. They need to learn that just because they can't see other people as they're taking their clothes off doesn't mean necessarily that others can't see them. So they need to be taught to close the door when they're getting dressed, or if they're in a dressing room, that they can pull the curtain. That's something that all of us learn incidentally, and we've talked about that before, that we can just look around and see, oh, everybody pulled that curtain to the dressing room as they changed clothes. The student might not know that, so you need to really stress those things. As well as in the introduction to this unit, I talked a lot about privacy issues as far as having, if you're teaching dressing and toileting and things like that, having the family involved, having it in the IEP. Really make sure you read over everything that I discussed in that introduction, because privacy is just a huge issue, and when teaching these things, you really need to approach them from a very professional manner. Now we're going to go to hygiene and toileting, and in this section we're going to talk about toileting for boys and girls, and also as far as feminine hygiene care. We're going to talk about hand washing, toothbrushing, shaving, and nail care. We're not going to get into makeup today just because there's not enough time in this unit, but I do want to stress that individuals with vision loss can apply makeup and learn to apply it well and wear it well. If this is something that you're teaching and you're not comfortable with it, there are a wealth of resources out there that you can read up on how to do it, as well as consult with rehab teachers on how to do these techniques. And even sometimes your makeup specialists at the mall and places can be very helpful. So please address at least this issue with your students. Often girls get into their teens and all the other girls are wearing makeup and they're not, because maybe the family doesn't think that they should or they can, or that a student with a vision impairment can learn to do this, and it's definitely something that they can learn to do. Now let's go back to talking about toileting. With toileting, you want to make sure that you're teaching socially acceptable behaviors. With this, I mean as far as what's appropriate when you're using the restroom and what's not. For boys, when you're first teaching them to learn to pee, you may have them pull their pants all the way down to their ankles so that they're out of the way and they don't get their clothing wet. But they need to learn as they get older that, when they go into a bathroom to use a urinal, all the men in there don't have their pants all the way down around their ankles. So they need to learn, what is it that everyone else does? Is it appropriate to be at the urinal and pick up a conversation with a bunch of people in there? To teach them and discuss those type of things. It may be appropriate in some situations and not in others. But again, it's back to that incidental learning. They don't know unless we address it and discuss it. And it may be even that as a female working with a male student, you may need to have another man discuss some of those issues with them. And vice versa, if you're a male instructor working with a female, you may have to have a woman discuss some of those issues. And this is where all these things, dressing, toileting, you really want to involve other professionals. And I do mention that a little bit later in the PowerPoint. But involve the parents, involve the school nurse, and everyone else that's working with the student. So teach socially acceptable behaviors. Teach orientation to specific bathrooms. When a student's very young and starts first learning potty training and things like that, it's important that they're familiar and comfortable with the bathroom that they're using at home, maybe the bathroom that they're using in the preschool. They really need to know what all is in there. Focusing mostly on the toilet and the sink and the towels, but they need to be aware of the whole bathroom. When they're out in public, the parent may not want to really spend the time, and really shouldn't, on the whole bathroom, and just do general orientation to the toilet and the sink. But at home, they really need to feel safe in that whole area and know what's there. As they get older, they're not going to a restroom more independently. They're not going to necessarily become familiar with the entire bathroom, but they need to know the generalities of the bathroom. They need to know what's typically in there. If there's a toilet in there, there's a sink in there, paper towel holders, where might typically those be located? Often to the left or the right of the sink, or maybe behind that on the wall. Where would the soap dish be located? Kind of the generals of what's there and where they might look for them, and even how to systematically go about finding those things. Also, you want to make sure that you teach students about door latches. There are a variety of different latches that can be used, and often, especially for females, where we go into the restroom and close the door and latch it, they might not know how to latch it, or they get it latched and have difficulty unlatching it. I used to have a board made up that had 5 or 6, 7 different type of latches on it, so that the student could actually explore some different latches and practice with them. You might not necessarily have that, but you may want to when you're out, even if you're doing an orientation mobility lesson, or work with the orientation mobility instructor. Say, well, hey, when you're out, if you visit a restroom, just have the student check out what kind of latches there and have them incorporate it into their lessons. That's, again, that team approach. Proper hand washing is something that you also really want to teach a student with toileting, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in the near future. As far as boys and teaching them to use to go to the bathroom, again, this is something that you may not always be teaching, but often parents need help on how to teach their students this, or their children this, and you may just be reinforcing what the parents are teaching. They really need guidance from you on how to do this. With boys, you want to teach them to align with their legs up against the toilet seat. In the beginning, when they're first learning and they're very little, then they actually want to put their legs right on the seat. As they get older, you may want to teach them how to kind of align and then back away a little bit so that they're not touching unfamiliar dirty toilets. Teach them to listen for the sound of water being hit. As they get older, again, to help with that alignment so that they're not touching the toilet, some people will actually flush the toilet first so that they can hear the sound and get oriented to where they want to be aiming. You may need to use hand-over-hand instruction with this. Again, you want family and other people very involved in what you're doing and how you plan to approach this. For boys, it may be helpful to have a little porta potty, one of those little toilets that are shorter, because it's just easier when you're very short than to use the big toilet. Also, if they're going to have a bowel movement and they're sitting on the toilet, the smaller toilet may be helpful, because sometimes when you can't see or you're very limited in sight, that toilet can just seem very big and fearful to them. Having a stool, if they're using the actual toilet instead of a little porta potty, can be helpful so that they have their feet on the stool. Sometimes sitting on the toilet with your feet dangling just makes you feel very lost in space, or the student to feel that way. So a stool for their feet can be helpful. When teaching toileting to girls, It's very much a lot of the same things that I mentioned with boys, teaching socially acceptable behavior, having a stool for their feet so that they're secure in the space that they're in and they know where they're at. We'll talk about feminine hygiene here in a little bit further, but mostly is the orientation of the bathroom and all those same things still apply to females as well. For boys and girls, make sure parents know that the student doesn't have to be able to do it all from the beginning. That they can help them with some of this, that they need to work towards independence and having the student do more and more on their own as they go. Some general things is to teach a student to maybe always have wet wipes with them, whether it's one in their purse or their wallet in case they need to wipe their hands or wash their hands and there isn't toilet paper or even paper towels or soap available. You want to teach the student when making sure that they're clean afterwards, that they want to wrap the toilet paper around their hand. Often it can be helpful to teach a student a certain number of wraps so that they don't end up with half a roll of toilet paper on their hand or just a little square. Often if they pull it out, depending on how big they are, if they're a little kid, it may be their whole arm length. Granted, by the time you're 18, a whole arm's length may be too much toilet paper. But you kind of want to gauge that to the size of the student, teach them how to measure a certain amount, and wrap it around their hand. Usually I say 3 times. You want to teach to wipe from front to back. You want to talk about with the student how are they going to know when they're clean after a bowel movement, or if they're menstruating, how are they going to know when they've wiped enough. And that may be actually visually doing that or actually from smell. And you want to teach them how to be able to check that without getting so close to their face that they get it on their face. Obviously, that's not a good thing. So you want to practice with clean toilet paper, even of how can you get close enough that you can tell, is this clean or is this not? I've even had put a clean piece of toilet paper and put a little bit of fragrance or something that's wet on there, so that when they're practicing at first, they can feel, oh, it's wet, I got it too close. And they practice with something that's not going to be offensive to them that they've touched their face with. And often, because this is such a uncomfortable subject or difficult thing, you don't address it at all. And it needs to be addressed that the student needs to know how and when they've wiped enough. And so that could be just looking for residue or smelling for residue. And also you want to teach the student that when they're done, to make sure that their hands are clean and dry before they pull up their clothes and button them. And this may be, again, where those wet wipes come into play. If they've had, got it on their hands. Not all times that you go to the bathroom would that be necessary, but it could be if the student had diarrhea or something. They really may need to use a wet wipe. And you may need to teach the student to always get that wet wipe out before they start all this. Teach the student to look for toilet paper before they go to the bathroom. Make sure that there's toilet paper there and available. As far as wiping their hands, it may just be wiping on a piece of toilet paper, putting it in the toilet, and then pulling their pants up. With females also, you want to make sure that they're aware of what type of things they can and they can't flush and how to dispose of sanitary items appropriately. And that's often, again, one of those incidental learning things that if we don't tell them about it and show them where these boxes can be found, that the student doesn't learn. Also, if they've had an accident of some sort where they have to use a lot of toilet paper, you may want to teach them how to put some of that into the sanitary napkin box, but do it in a way that's going to be okay for the person emptying the box as well. The Texas School for the Blind resources that I mentioned at the very beginning of this lecture have excellent resources on how to teach feminine hygiene and discuss this at length. As far as feminine hygiene, some things I want to add though is be aware of family and cultural values as far as whether it's okay to use tampons or not to use tampons, whether the family feels that this is something that should just be taught at home and that it shouldn't be taught in school, really have the family involved and make sure you know as far as cultural implications of teaching these things. So, and use the resources of the sex education teacher, the school nurse, and other professionals. Some things as far as feminine hygiene and menstruation. The student needs to be made aware of how to identify when they might be getting their periods, such as feeling cramps, having a headache, wetness that may occur before it begins, different things like that. And they also need to be taught how to discreetly carry feminine hygiene products. They might not be aware of that when they open their purse that others can see the products. They need to be taught how to keep those out of sight and when it's appropriate to have them out and when it's not. And then discuss with the student, too, how they're going to handle an accident if they have one. I did mention involving everyone else in the team or using other professionals. Definitely do that. And again, if you're a male instructor working with a female, it may be just hooking the student and the parents up to appropriate resources that could help them with this topic. But you need to be careful that you just don't avoid it altogether after. Final note with toileting is the hand washing. You want to teach proper hand washing as far as using soap, water, lathering long enough, drying your hands. Something I like to teach is for students to learn to turn on the cold water first and then the hot water to get the correct temperature. A lot of students will turn on that hot water, reach under to feel if it's the right temperature and get burnt. So you want to teach them to turn the cold water on, then turn the hot water on to adjust the temperature, wash their hands, turn the hot water off, then the cold water. That way they avoid the risk of getting burnt. And when they're young, you may need to use hand over hand or hand under hand again to do this skill, to really teach them to lather up and wash and rinse well and everything like that. Next, let's talk about brushing teeth. As far as brushing their teeth, the thing that's often can be difficult is getting the toothpaste onto the toothbrush. There's a couple things that could be done here. One is just teaching them techniques to get toothpaste onto the toothbrush. A lot of students have difficulty actually getting the tip of the toothpaste to the brush. Their spatial orientation is where they have difficulty and they keep missing the toothbrush. You can use a darker colored toothbrush or a dark colored toothpaste if they have low vision. But I like to, even with low vision, I like to pair it with some tactile orientation. This is in the Foundations of RT book as well that talks about toothbrushing, and you should have read some of the different techniques that they talk about how to get toothpaste on. Often, the way that I find students have success with is just taking their thumb and their pointer finger and putting it on either side of the bristles and then applying the toothpaste that way. That allows them to actually feel where the brush starts and how much they've squeezed on. Some people put the bristles actually towards the end of their fingers. Some people put the bristles up towards the palm of their hand, so it actually touches the skin that's between the pointer and the thumb. And they then can actually kind of run the tube across their hand and locate the bristles that way. Some people actually, that makes it worse and they get toothpaste all over their hands. So you kind of have to work with the student and figure out what works for them. I've also had students, instead of putting their fingers on either side of the bristle, they just put their pointer finger alongside the bristle and use that as their tactile landmark. If the student really has difficulty getting toothpaste onto the bristles, and let me back up and say, practice this without any toothpaste on there. Have them really just practice bringing the tube to the bristles, back and forth, because this is something that really takes practice. But if the student really has difficulty with this, you can have a student actually put the toothpaste right under their finger and then put the toothpaste in their mouth and brush their teeth. I've had students that actually have their very own tube of toothpaste that no one else uses, and they squeeze a little bit into their mouth and then brush their teeth. Those are also two other options that a student could do. Something else is often students will take the top off the toothpaste and then use it and can't relocate the top. That's where the little flip top ones can be very nice. And I've actually, just kept the same flip top and taken it from one tube back to another tube. But you have to teach the student also when they use the flip top, when they're done, to wipe it off with a little piece of toilet paper or Kleenex and put that in the garbage and put the lid back on. Otherwise, as they keep squeezing over time, it builds up and there's a lot of gunk at the end. Gunk, good word. A lot of gunk at the end, and it makes putting the toothpaste on difficult. Let's talk about shaving for a moment. With shaving for men in particular, you want to teach them how to create landmarks on their face or use landmarks so that they're not shaving half their hair away on their head. Some things you can use is if the student wears glasses, is actually have them keep their glasses on, and maybe they just shave up to where the sides of glasses come out. They can also use maybe their ear, and everybody's ear is different, so you have to kind of look at their haircut and whether they wear sideburns and talk with them, about what style they're going for. But pick your landmark based on how far up they want to shave. Maybe it's from the earlobe, they put their finger out, touching the bottom of their earlobe with their finger going out, and they just shave, up to that finger. Or some people will use the bottom of their nose, and they put their pointer finger or whatever finger at the bottom of their nose, and then have it going out, from their nose, their hand towards their ear, and then they only shave once their finger's there below that line. So use different landmarks. As far as using electric razor or a hand razor, that's really going to be a personal choice. For some students, electric razor may be all they need, and it may be the safest way to go. But for some students, they may have a really thick beard, and that's not going to work for them. They can learn to use a razor. Most students can. When teaching this, I often tell people to leave the safety cap on the razor at first, and actually teach with that so that they get the feel for, how hard to push. Some students at first will be pushing so hard, and I have the safety thing on here, that they're really going to cut their face up. So you really want to practice numerous times with that so that they learn, the right pressure and that you can observe and see the right pressure. And if you're not teaching this, again, it's back to maybe this is something they're working on at home, but parents really need guidance on how to teach these things to their students. So use that safety cap on there so they get good at it. I found as far as gels and shaving creams, and I shouldn't say always, this is more general, but many students find that a gel is easier to feel. If they put that on, it's easier to feel where they shaved and where they haven't shaved. So they want to use a systematic pattern of overlapping, and they don't want to just shave here and to the right and to the left. They want to start at one side and do overlapping patterns, and then as they go, feel with their fingers to feel where's the beard gone, where's the beard not gone. And often a gel, it's easier to feel that way. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about nail care. You want to make sure that this is another area that you address, whether it's with the student and with the student's parents, or whether the parents are teaching it. Either way, you need to make sure that they, if the parents are doing it, that they know how to teach it, and that it's not something that we just don't mention. Nail care can be very difficult for some students, especially if they have very limited vision. The orientation of where the nail's at when they're clipping can be difficult, as well as just fearful for many students. They're afraid of getting cut. There's multiple things that you can do for a student with low vision. There are nail clippers that you can buy that have magnifiers on them. There are gadgets you can buy that you put the magnifier in, a standard pocket magnifier in that holds it so that then they can get their finger underneath there. That's something that you could explore with the student, as well as just teaching them how to file their nails and not even have to use the clippers. But that doesn't mean that clippers can't be used. It's just, if that's something that's difficult, then filing is an option. You can use a big file. Sometimes the files that you actually buy, like the little emery boards, that'll work for some students. Some students actually need a big sturdy file that you'll buy in the cosmetic section of Walmart or stores like that, or even if you go to like Sally Hansen's or some of the specialty cosmetic places, they sell really nice files that work well. I have a file that's really thick and easier for the student to hold. They can actually file individual fingers or all of them at one time. So the big files are nice. In addition to nail files, there's nail blocks. These work great, and I really like them a lot. These are things that you often see a manicurist using on nails, and they often use them to buff up the nails, to shine them, or to file off ridges on nails. All they are blocks of foam that are covered with sandpaper, and many of the times you'll buy them and they're just white, and they have a fine, thin sandpaper on them, and all the sides are the same. But you can also find ones that have multiple coarseness of sandpaper, and not always, but typically the black ones have coarser sandpaper. With this, they can use this to smooth off those ridges, but also to file their nails. And I really like this because it kind of molds to the finger, and they can run their finger back and forth across it individually. They can do all of them at the same time. They really work very well. And some of them will just have a section that just has foam on it. And this is after they're filing, they can run their fingers across that foam part, and it'll help get rid of any little loose pieces of nail that are rough from the sandpaper. Kind of just smooths everything out. So I often just teach people to use the nail block. They're really a good tool for filing their nails. There are times you can buy little nail squares. I didn't take these out of the package. It's the same concept as a nail block. It's just a square piece of foam that's about 1/4 inch thick that has sandpaper or sandpaper type substance on either side. I've had some students like these really well, but most I'd say prefer the nail block. So as far as trimming or filing down their nails, those are the things that I often teach or recommend. As far as painting their nails, this is something that, again, many people will not address or not discuss with the student because they just think it's something if you can't see you shouldn't do. But we need to be aware of that our students don't like to stand out, and we want to make them feel as comfortable as possible and teach them to be able to do the things that their peers are doing, and not just assume that we're not going to teach it or that they're not going to do it. As far as filing their nails or painting their nails, different tips for this is one, just with removing the polish. The polish in the jar is a very good thing. They don't have to worry about spilling it as much. All it is it's polished in a jar that has a sponge in there. I'm going to take the lid off. And a hole in that sponge where you put your finger down in the hole and rub it back and forth. This is real good for taking the polish off. You'll need to teach them too, though, as that sponge starts to wear out or as it starts to dry out, that they're going to need to get another one. Because they may not be able to see that they're not getting all the polish off. So then you need to teach them that it needs to be a really moist sponge in there. As far as putting the polish on, there are some tips for that and some little adaptations that can help. Often I tell students, especially when they're first learning or if they have difficulty doing this, pick lighter colors, more neutral colors. They're more forgiving of mistakes than if you have a bright red and you get a little on your skin. That's going to be more noticeable. So it can be helpful to pick more neutral colors. Using Vaseline can be helpful. If you have the student put the Vaseline around the very edge of the nail, like on the cuticle and the finger, and then paint the nail, and let the nail dry, and then wipe the Vaseline off. What happens is the Vaseline, anywhere the Vaseline is, the nail polish will not stick. The trick with the Vaseline is that the student has to really be sure that they only get it on the skin. Because if they get it on their fingernail, the Vaseline on their fingernail, the polish won't stick to the fingernail. Another thing that can be helpful with doing nail polishing is putting the nail polish in the refrigerator so that when they go to use it, it's actually cold so they can feel where it's going on. That can be helpful. I've also seen people use a sponge, like a big raised sponge, so they stick their finger on the sponge and it kind of isolates things to help with the polishing, so they're not trying with all their fingers on the table. It's one finger's raised up above the other. The thing to be careful with that is if you do one and then you put another one on the sponge, you have to be careful when you curl the finger you've already painted back that you're not rubbing it against the sponge. You can teach them to do it under CCTV. That can be helpful as far as applying the polish. And you may want to combine some of these. Keep the polish in the fridge and then use it under the CCTV so they have the coldness, they have a little bit of tactile feedback as well as visual feedback. If a student really has difficulty with polishing their nails, but they really want them to look polished, you can also use Vaseline to make them shiny and look like they have clear nail polish on. You just take some Vaseline, put it on the nail, rub it in, and then take a soft cloth and buff it, and that'll make them look real shiny like they have clear polish on. That only lasts, for that day. They have to do it every day, but it does make a nice